Hail and well-met slayers of giants. Welcome to Chapter 14 of my serial novel, Tilting at Windmills. Remember, this is a draft. There are lots of changes I'll be making in the final manuscript based on feedback from readers who've posted in the comments on Substack and Patreon. If you notice anything, from the smallest typo to the largest structural change, I'll be very grateful for your notes. So become a patron of my Patreon or subscribe to my Substack so you get a little reminder each week when a new chapter comes out. And if you know someone who might enjoy this show, tell them to go back and catch up with you. So here's Tilting at Windmills, Chapter 14, A Side Quest of Errors. The next day, Benjamin and Chris made it to Portland. As they passed through the gorge and Mount Hood came into view, Chris could sense Benjamin's increasing tension. She worried he was having second thoughts about the whole reunion, and she pushed herself to ask rather than holding on to that worry and undermining the new commitment to keep lines of communication open. Benjamin reassured her his anxiety wasn't caused by any reluctance to return to their marriage. The vista in front of him, beautiful as it was, forced him to see his future from a distance. He had no job, no money, and was essentially trading his couch surfing at his son's and parents' for a similar offer of housing from his wife and stepkid, who'd only recently found jobs and didn't yet own a couch. His relationship with his stepkid had been strained to the breaking point by the failed attempt to expatriate to Spain. When a group receives an F on a collaborative project, especially if everyone was desperate to do well on it in order to pass the class, even if everyone drops the ball in their own way, the recriminations and resentments are difficult to avoid, and they aren't easily processed when the class ends and the participants no longer have much contact with one another. Since Benjamin had left almost immediately after the broken family had returned to the United States, his stepkid had enjoyed a surge of relief at not having this surly, mopey, frustrated presence lurking all the time. Benjamin didn't know if his stepkid resented him more because of his own barely concealed frustration, or because he was a trigger for their guilt at their own failure in the project. This omniscient narrator can tell you it was almost entirely the former. But now, without any real processing of that breakage, he was returning to their living space feeling he had nothing to offer. He thought maybe, in a way, his lack of resources, emotional as well as financial, would be advantageous. After all, he could no longer resent that they were living on his dime and refusing to contribute to the household's well-being in this way or that way if he had nothing to contribute, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of hope or expectations. Perhaps he could reach a kind of Zen Buddhist peace, which would produce harmony, expecting nothing and providing the kinds of little household assistance he'd wished for in Spain. Of course, this was wrong and foolish. Benjamin was about as far from a Zen Buddhist in temperament and self-control as a person can be, completely incapable of turning off his own ambitions and anxieties. But as he watched the sun setting behind Mount Hood, as they approached from the east, he deluded himself that his own emptiness might be helpful in this way. Chris, for her part, felt more skeptical that the relationship between her husband and kid could be repaired by Benjamin's demonstrations of his willingness to help out around the house, wisely recognizing that would not help process his resentment and might magnify it, as he did the things he wished her kid had done and waited in vain for some magic light bulb to click in her kid's head. But Chris had made a decision that no one, not even her kid, got to decide that she didn't get to have her marriage back. So while Benjamin returned with a supplicant's attitude, if a resentful one, Chris returned defiant. She had chosen the relationship that made her happy, and if her adult child didn't like it, they could move out or try to make it on their own in a way they'd not yet managed to do, and that might be for the best. Reassured Benjamin's anxiety wasn't about their relationship and might just be his new baseline level of freaked outness, Chris consoled him that their happiness would not be contingent on her kid's satisfaction with Benjamin's return. Benjamin tried to emulate Chris's lack of concern about this particular issue, but because so many other things were variable, he could only imagine all the ways the situation might spiral further out of control if things got even worse. What if he couldn't find a job for a sustained period of time? What if Chris changed her mind about enduring her kid's disapproval and decided her role as a parent trumped her role as a spouse and sent him away? He had nowhere left to go and no means to relocate again. His credit rating might have taken a nosedive, but he could still borrow tomorrow's worries every time he applied for the loan. Luckily, Benjamin's humiliating return to a household where he wasn't uniformly welcome was counterbalanced by the enthusiasm of some of the apartment's other occupants. His stepkid didn't want him there, and their cats couldn't care less, But the 3 dogs were as overjoyed as he expected. They leapt all over him, rolled on their backs in front of him to ask for belly rubs they'd missed, and leaned into his hugs as he nearly wept to be reunited with them. Some meetings go as well as one can hope for. Others go exactly as expected, and some, as Rolando and Serge discovered, are disasters. Following the directions the Jinn Nasir had given them, Rolando, Serge, and Callie made their way to the homestead of Nasir's cousin, a Jinn named Mukhadi. Serge and Rolando filled Callie in on the details as best they could without the magical parts. "We met this tattoo artist in Cleveland," Serge explained. "Well, we were kind of tricked into meeting him. We were told he had something for us, and he was told we were coming there to kill him. So he attacked us as soon as we introduced ourselves, but when we defended ourselves and didn't kill him, he told us about his cousin in Utah and asked us to send a message to him." "What kind of message?" Callie asked. Rolando inclined his head meaningfully. "The kind which gives him a greatly reduced number of options." Serge clocked Callie's increased fear. "Wait until we tell you about this guy, and you'll be on board." Rolando nodded. "This person, the cousin, Mukhadi, is using his considerable powers of persuasion and the legal latitude afforded to him by a rift in the local religious sect to assemble a harem of very young girls to be his wives." "We're going to let him know he needs to set them all free, or else," Serge said. Callie raised an eyebrow. "Or else what?" "Or else we will free them by force, and in such a way that he will not be able to enslave them again," Rolando said. "You'll kill him." "Not if we can help it. We hope it can be resolved peacefully, of course, but we cannot leave these girls in his thrall, so we have an alternate plan just in case." Serge turned his head without taking his eyes off the road. Killing him is Plan C. Beyond Salt Lake City, outside of any town of any size, they found the residents using Nasir's directions. 3 single-wide trailers sat in a U-shape around a cylindrical metal tank with a pitched round roof, like a water tower one might find atop an apartment building, minus the legs. The gravel road leading up to the compound was barely distinct from the sand and patchy scrubgrass basin filling the valley to the dark, rocky mountains ringing the horizon. As the SUV neared the 3 trailer homes, the road curved into a big circle, more appropriate for a gaudy mansion than the factory-made villa. Serge pulled up to the point nearest the water tank, parked, and then had Callie reach back into the trunk space and hand him his broadsword before he risked stepping out of the car, remembering the way the magic blade of Baganawatig saved his life when Nasir tried to blast him with a bolt of lightning. He held the sword up in front of him defensively as he stepped out of the SUV. The crunch of his tennis shoes paired with the click and squeak of one of the front doors, the occupant cued by the sound of the car's arrival. Serge's eyes peered around either side of the raised, sheathed sword at a 15-year-old girl aiming a Ruger 1022 at him. Serge felt fairly certain the sword would be no defense against a little .22 caliber bullet, or a barrage of them if the girl's gun had a bump stock and a loose trigger. He lowered the sword to his side. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to speak to a man named Mukhadi. Is he here by any chance?" "He's my husband," the girl said. Another door squeaked open, and an even younger girl jumped out, bouncing with excitement and slowing to an elementary school skip before stopping just behind the girl pointing the gun at him. "My husband, too," she belted. Both girls wore similar simple dresses, beige, floor-length garments they made themselves. They also wore head coverings that looked like medieval wimples, but some of their long, straight blonde hair escaped through the front, hung evenly on either side of their faces, and ended in rough-cut chunks near their waists. Their faces were dirty, caked in a layer of fine desert dust. Beneath the grime, their brown freckles were similar enough that Serge wondered if they were sisters before they became sister wives. A third girl came out of the furthest trailer, walked around behind the water tank, and made her way behind her sister wives. Though she had the same coloring as the first 2, a number of features convinced Serge she wasn't biologically related to them. She moved more slowly than they did, and she caressed her distended belly. Serge felt an additional flash of rage, but he tried to hide it. "Let me guess, Mukhadi is your husband, too." "Folks around here call him Mosiah, but we call him Master," the pregnant girl said. She rubbed her belly and looked askance at her sister wives as she said, "I'm Master's favorite, because Jesus made me be with child first." "Not first," the girl with the rifle growled. "My baby just went to heaven before he was born." The pregnant girl shrugged. "And Master says we shouldn't dwell on that, because he doesn't like it when we're sad, remember?" "I'm not sad," the armed girl said. Her voice was more deadpan than the desiccated basin of the desert valley around them when she said, "I'm filled with the light and joy of Jesus." "Great, good. Okay," Serge said. Then let's lower our weapons, and my friends are going to get out of the car, and we're going to, pray together. We're here to pray with Mukadi. You said his name is..." "He was baptized Mosiah by Pastor Moroni of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints," the youngest girl said. She sounded quite proud, either of her husband or of her own ability to rattle off the church's name so smoothly. "Pastor Moroni was our pastor when we were little. His seventh wife is our mother's sister, so he's our uncle," the oldest girl explained. "His third wife was my grandma, so he's my step-grandpa," the pregnant girl said. "An uncle's a closer relative than a step-grandpa," the one with the rifle said. She lowered the gun and turned towards her sister-wife as she said it, accidentally aiming the gun at her other sister-wife in the process, making Serge cringe. Safely out of the line of fire, he tapped on the passenger window behind him, then double-checked with his interlocutors. "So it's okay if my friends come out?" Callie didn't wait, and when the girls saw her, their faces lit up. "Hi," the oldest said. "What's your name?" the pregnant one said. "You're pretty," the youngest said. "Thank you," Callie said. "What are your names?" "I'm Soraya," the one holding the rifle said. "I'm Tylin," the one caressing her baby bump said. "I'm Deseret," the youngest said. "Nice to meet you all. Is your husband home? If you can get him to come out and talk with my friends, the four of us can go over there," she pointed vaguely at some spot near the trailer to their left, "and talk about the kind of stuff women like to talk about while the men have their discussion." Deseret looked at Soraya with a pleading glee. Soraya shrugged. "Master," she said, her voice pinched by submissiveness but aimed at the middle trailer Tylin came from, "there are some men who want to talk to you while we talk to their friend." A deep voice boomed from the other side of the door. "Did you ask them what their jobs are, like I told you to? Are they cops? Social workers? Missionaries from some heathen religion? Salespeople? I told you to find out what they want, woman." "Sorry, master," Soraya called back. Then she directed her question at Rolando. The older knight walked up behind Serge with his cane swinging like a loose pendulum, providing him no support, but not menacing either, just jaunty and a bit foppish. In his other hand he held a black metal maglite flashlight, 1.5 feet long, the kind only used by people who wanted a weighty club in addition to a flashlight, since much lighter, brighter, smaller options were now ubiquitous in the illumination market. He tried to carry it in the gentlest way possible, but it looked like a heavy club because it doubled as precisely that. "What are you all's jobs, and what do you want with Mosiah?" "I can assure you, madam, we are not social workers or police or tax collectors or any other functionary of the state, nor are we associated with any religious organization, nor do we intend to sell you anything. We have been given a message by a family member of your master's, one that is secret and can only be delivered to him directly." Soraya called into the house over her shoulder. "They say they aren't cops or missionaries or anything, and they have a message for you from your family." "They got guns?" Mosiah yelled. "No, master, but one has a sword. He's just holding it, though." "A sword?" Mosiah shouted. Then the door banged open, and a very human-looking man stepped out. He wore blue jeans and a flannel shirt with black and red checks. His skin was white, his hair dirty blonde, and his short beard only a little darker brown. As he approached, Serge noted the djinn's eyes, the kind of blue that was popular in his newly adopted religious sect, but a shade and intensity belying his human glamour. "Well, you ladies will have to forgive me for my coarse language, but this is all bullcrap, because I don't have any family to be sending me messages. So I think you all have the wrong address, and I'd appreciate it if you got off my property and left my poor wives alone to get their chores done." Rolando took a step forward, but remained behind Serge. "I am Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona. This is Sir Sanchez of the town of Illes, my Uber driver. And our friend here is Lady Callie the Lion-Hearted of San Leon. She was just going to talk with your wives about womanly things so we men can have a private conversation." "There's nothing you can say to me that they can't hear. I don't have to keep secrets from my wives. They know I'm the head of the household and their lord in all things under heaven. Right, ladies?" Yes, master," the three said in unison, bowing their heads as they did so. Serge shrugged, but the edge in his voice expressed anything but calm. "Fine. We have a message for you from Nasir. your cousin in Cleveland. He says to tell you, "Oh shit!" Messiah hissed as his legs turned into blue smoke, his flannel turned into a red vest with black trim, his beard and hair turned shiny black and extended into a ponytail in back, and a similarly beaded ponytail hanging from his chin. His skin turned a soft blue decorated with a few glowing tattoos, though not nearly as many as his completely covered cousin. The fully revealed Jinn rose 10 feet above the ground, aimed a finger gun gesture at Serge, and fired. Serge raised Baganewatig as fast as he could, but even if he kept the sword pointed down in front of him, it would have done its job, because the bolt of lightning altered course slightly to meet it as it came up, then remained channeled into the blade as the knight in training raised it fully to a defensive position. Mosiah Mukhadi sent a stream of electricity into the sword for longer than he'd ever sustained the smell, a full 5 seconds, and then, panting, he let his arm flop down. "Okay, fine, let's try this!" He cocked back his other hand, like he was preparing to throw a baseball, but when he thrust it forward, he held it extended, and a jet of flame shot from his fingertips. Rolando expected it and danced around Serge, coming to a stop in front of his young protege, facing Serge, his back to the incoming blast. 2 feet away from him, the fire split as though it had smacked into a barrier, then arced around the invisible obstruction in 4 distinct tongues. These whipped against Rolando's back, burning through his coat and shirt, exposing his bone armor, piercing between the tiny spaces in the segmented bones, and finding their way to the tattoo Nasir had given him. The ward absorbed the fire like a vacuum cleaner sucking light dirt off a hardwood floor, and in seconds the Jinn's second spell dissipated. During these seconds, Rolando prepared by holding the maglite up in his left and the head of his cane in his right, both near his mouth. He spoke his own incantation, making the skull of the raven glow, and green tendrils of light, like the arms of electricity in a plasma globe, found the flashlight and illuminated it, not turning on its beam, but making the black metal emit a green glow completely opposing the underlying object's darkness. When the fire, expended, stopped heating the knight's back, an experience which was painful, but only a sunburn sting, not a third-degree immolation of his flesh, Rolando spun around and aimed the flashlight at the Jinn. The light bulb remained as dim as the rest of the device, but the green glow pulsed slightly as the knight spoke the last words. Mukhadi screamed as the power gripped the wispy edges of his smoky lower half and pulled him into the lamp. His form stretched, each part of his body becoming grotesque in turn as it thinned and elongated. The worst was his head at the end, which managed to elongate to more than 5 feet, while pinholing down to a cylinder less than 2 inches wide as it was absorbed, still screaming, into the glass end of the flashlight. The whole physical portion of the altercation lasted less than 20 seconds. Serge and Rolando had recognized the Jinn in his true form, but Callie, Soraya, Tai Lin, and Deseret had all taken in the exact same visual stimulus through their eyes, then had their brains conveniently translate the information into 4 distinct short films they could most comfortably comprehend. Soraya had watched her husband turn into a dark-skinned human man, the kind of person she'd been taught to fear, and that person had pointed 2 different handguns at Serge and Rolando, fired them both, and then had been absorbed by the comforting authority of a police officer's flashlight. Tai Lin had watched her husband turn into a red, bat-winged demon, flap up above his enemies and throw fire at them, then descend into the ground, returning to hell. Deseret saw her husband turn into a blonde-haired, blue-skinned angel with white feathered wings. He'd ignited a sword of fire, aimed it at the men beneath him, and then had followed that fire into whatever container of heathen, probably Catholic, holy water the older man held. Callie saw an uninteresting blonde-haired man remain completely unchanged, but pull out an AR-15 he'd somehow hidden from her line of sight, and aim it at Serge before Rolando pointed a mysterious technological device at him. Rolando's gadget erupted with electricity and fire, like a Ghostbusters proton beam and proton pack in one, absorbing the man with the AR-15 before he could fire a shot. Rolando turned back to Serge to make sure he was all right, then faced the woman and the 3 girls. He tapped the edge of the flashlight against the side of his metal cane, the scabbard hiding his own magical blade, Makawabide. He intended for the loud clinking sound to assure the girls their former captor was safely trapped. "My ladies, you have been rescued from bondage by myself, Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona, and my former squire, Sir Sanchez of the town of Eels, guardian of justice. We are knights-errant, and according to the code of chivalry we both follow, it is our duty to—" "Give him back!" Deseret screamed as she launched herself in Rolando's direction. Her fingers curled into claws, her face contorted with rage. Soraya, initially not sure how to react to what she'd seen, decided Deseret must be onto something, or at least required her support, so she raised the rifle and took aim at the two men. Callie had immediately looked to the girls after Mokadi's capture, expecting some significant reaction, so she was more prepared for Soraya's action than Soraya was herself. Callie reached out and grabbed the thin barrel of the rifle, pushing it away and yanking it forward. As Soraya lost control of the gun, her finger pulled the trigger. The bullet went safely wide of the two knights, but passed through the rear passenger side window of the SUV, shattering the tinted glass before lodging in the far interior upholstery near the car's ceiling. Callie had enough control of the gun to force the butt end back into Soraya's face, breaking her nose with one great thrust and sending the girl onto her back in the dust. Then Callie shouldered the gun and spun on Tai Lin, expecting an attack from behind. Tai Lin, who'd just seen her husband disappear into the ground, then heard a gunshot, then seen her sister bloodied, and now stared down the barrel of a rifle, did two things without thinking about either. She sat down heavily on the ground, and she wet herself. Deseret crossed the short distance to Serge and Rolando. Serge stuck out an uncertain arm to corral her, but she swiped at him with her nails, scratching his neck and breaking through the barrier of his arm like a Red Rover champion or an NFL running back, and aiming her next attacks at the flashlight in Rolando's hand. Not quite as quick as lightning, since the men now had two experiences to serve as bases of comparison, but far more quickly than the 13-year-old could prepare for, Rolando turned sideways, held the flashlight up and away from her with one hand, and straight-armed her forehead with the other. He allowed her two comic pinwheel scratches at the air on either side of his arm before he crouched, spun backwards, and caught her legs in a large arcing karate swipe. The girl fell heavily onto her side, then began to roll up into a seated position, but Rolando popped up far more quickly and used the toe of his boot to gently press her down into the ground. She scratched at the leg of his pants and even attempted to take a bite out of his ankle, before giving up and flopping her head back against the ground so she could scream at the sky with all her considerable 13-year-old volume. Callie walked backwards to Serge and Rolando, still aiming the rifle at the prone Soraya and the seated, sobbing Tai Lin. All three girls dissolved into tears of different volume and violence, Tai Lin shaking as she gasped for air, Soraya crying quietly, and Deseret wailing less like an adult woman who had just lost her husband, and more like a child who has been refused something they want purchased for them in a store. "Let me guess," Callie said over her shoulder, her voice raised over the din and sounding even more furious than she intended. "You two thought you'd just knight in shining armor this shit, and never had any kind of plan D for what you'd do with the girls, let alone a plan E for what you'd do if they didn't want to be rescued." Rolando looked down at the ground, ashamed, and took his foot off Deseret. The girl curled into a fetal ball and kept crying, though more quietly. Serge opened his mouth, gawped like a fish a couple of times while trying to think of a defense, and then said, "The guy, this Mokadi, was planning to build a whole army of half hymns, and make a whole country to rule over as an emperor. We said we'd stop him, and yeah, that's great. Just next time you're going into a hostage situation, give a little thought to what you'll do if the hostages don't want to be saved." Serge looked at Rolando, and both men nodded, simultaneously realizing if they'd fucked up the planning of this side quest so badly, they'd have to do 100 million times as much planning for the main quest to save a whole nation whose population might not desire their services either. If you're excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube or like and share on TikTok or Reels or whatever app you're on now. If you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider supporting my Substack or Patreon. Each week I'll give a shout out to some of those patrons. This week I'm thanking Substack subscribers Kyle Smith, someone named 1Q75, which seems to me to be a little overly self-effacing for someone with such excellent taste in Substacks, but then I'm biased, and Larry Carter Jr., writer of transgressive short fiction and poetry, which you can find by following his Substack at Larry Carter Jr. Thank you all for your support of the Substack. If any of you listeners are creators and have something to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com. See you back here next week for Chapter 15 of Tilting at Windmills. Teaser, I already hinted there's more to Callie than meets the eye. Next week, you'll find out just how much more.